This is part 2 of our conversation with Nick Rosenthal, co-CEO of Griffin Capital, on Opportunity Zones 2.0. If you haven't heard part 1 yet, we'd encourage you to go back and start there first. In part 1, Nick walked us through the sweeping changes Congress made to the program on July 4th, 2025, through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, what permanence means for the planning conversation, and why a rolling 5-year deferral, a restored basis step-up, and census tract redesignations every 10 years meaningfully change how families can think about investing a taxable gain. So with that, let's dive in. So governors will redesignate where these zones are on a rolling 10-year cycle. So new tracts become effective this cycle, January 1, 2027. We're still not sure where these will be. Probably have a decent idea just because of the new kind of economic constraints on that and population constraints. What does this mean for deal flow going forward? Is there anything about what the new map might look like that makes certain parts of the country more compelling for the next cycle of investment?
So I would say we're already starting the process. So we have about 25,000 census tracts that have been designated that meet the criteria for selection. And now the governors start on July 1st nominating zones, and Treasury will certify those zones by October. So it'll be a bit of an iterative process. The thing that I'm very encouraged about this time around is the public sector recognizes that they are competing with their counterparts in other states for private sector capital. And so as a reaction to that, they are bringing the private sector capital in ahead of time and saying, we know which census tracts are eligible. How are you looking at these? And we are part of those conversations with the economic development offices of various states, trying to help them educate themselves on how they can effectively be the beneficiaries of the capital that is going to go into this program. So a lot more proactive collaboration between the public and the private sector this time around. I think the other dynamic here that's great with resetting tracts every 10 years is governors get to look at their state, look at where certain counties or municipalities have seen outsized growth in investment and be able to use this as a tool to direct capital to other places. So zones that potentially got overbuilt the first time around or saw a lot of investment might not qualify based on the criteria that we see today. Those zones will come off the map, and then there will be other zones that are in close proximity to the path of growth of zones that have seen a lot of capital investment and growth over the last several years. And this will be a tool for governors to be able to expand that growth. So I look at secondary markets in the Sun Belt. So primary markets saw a lot of capital investment, both OZ and non-OZ, over the last several years based on post-COVID population migration, tax policy in those states, employers moving to the Southeast and Southwestern U.S. I could see secondary markets in those states being designated and continuing to generate a lot of growth. I think there are certainly infill tracts in major metros that have seen a lot of change around them over the last couple of years that may not have been eligible previously and potentially are eligible now. And then we have, obviously, the expansion of the bill with rural opportunity zone funds, which we'll talk about. But this is going to be a great economic tool for states to be able to look at what has happened over the last several years and where they want to see that growth continue, and they'll designate census tracts that qualify to be able to help accelerate that growth.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, and one that's easily missed is that states will be competing for this, and whether it's the states and their economic development respective organizations. So that aligns in some ways their strategy of setting these zones with the investors, right? Because that money is going to flow where the opportunities are.
That's right, and they want the jobs, they want the capital investment, and I think it really creates an opportunity for them to think big and say, if I want a large mixed use development, or I want to drive more workforce housing or infrastructure related projects, or this is a census tract that post COVID has seen some change in a negative way, and we'd like to infuse capital back into that part of our state. This is a way for them to do that, and they are bringing the private sector in ahead of time and saying, okay, here are our eligible tracts. How do you look at these, and how are we going to position ourselves to attract your capital? And that's a very positive conversation from an investment perspective.
So the fifth area that I wanted to look at, and it's kind of the wild card a little bit, but super interesting, is the concept of rural opportunity zones. The new law creates these QROFs, Qualified Rural Opportunity Funds, or zones, and the basis step up jumps from 10% to 30%. So what we were just talking about. Again, found money, 30% forgiveness, effectively, if those rural investments are held 5 years, and the substantial improvement requirement is cut in half from 50% instead of 100%. So right now, and you can explain this better than myself, but developers and investors need to improve that property and invest at least 100% of what the acquisition cost was. Now it's only 50% for these rural opportunity funds. So the bar has been lowered, and the tax advantages have been increased, which opens a door for value add deals that wouldn't have worked before, potentially. So, Nick, who is the rural opportunity zone investor? Are these areas actually investable for institutional capital, or is this a provision that looks better in the legislation than it might look in practice?
I think it's to be determined in a lot of respects. And the way we think about this, and maybe giving you a little bit of framework as to how this ended up in the bill, might be helpful. So as part of the reconciliation process, the House presents their bill, the Senate presents their bill, and then if they have disagreements, they go to conference. But effectively, when the first Opportunity Zone Fund bill was passed as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, again, that was a reconciliation process. And when the House passed their version of the bill, there was no opportunity zones in it. So this really came out of the Senate. This time around, under OB3, the House, and in particular Ways and Means, put in this Rural Opportunity Zone Fund concept. So the chair of Ways and Means is Jason Smith, represents the state of Missouri. And as you think about rural opportunity zones, which are generally, less populated, the view is that they don't receive the capital investment from the private sector that urban census tracts have historically seen. And we certainly saw that the first time around in the Opportunity Zone Fund bill. But the concept here was, how do we expand the use case of this bill beyond just housing, beyond just real estate? And as you think about sort of the promise of bringing jobs back to the heartland, manufacturing back to the heartland, the thought process was, by creating significant incentives through this bill for investors to think about investing in these types of projects, that might be more of a reality. And so, to your point, the basis improvement concept changes the equation from ground up development to potentially just redevelopment, so that threshold is lower. Now, when we think about substantial improvement, one of the things to think about there is the way substantial improvement is actually framed in the bill. It's exclusive of land value. So it lends itself really well to development, because if you exclude land value, you can double your basis as soon as you start swinging a hammer effectively. On the rural side, if you can take a farm or a manufacturing facility that might be outdated and put more capital into it and expand it, maybe it doesn't meet that 100% substantial improvement clause, but probably certainly would that 50%. So they lowered the threshold there. And then obviously created an additional incentive with a 30% reduction at the end of the deferral period as opposed to the 10%. So for the investors that have a specific thesis around agriculture, logistics, energy infrastructure, maybe workforce housing near rural manufacturing, I think this potentially works. From our perspective, investability is really a function of scale and depth and exit liquidity. And so some rural markets don't support that, and some do. So as investors, we're going to pursue rural where the fundamentals stand on their own. We're not going to chase a basis step up into a market with no exit optionality. I mean, the biggest benefit here is long-term tax-free growth. So if there's no exit liquidity optionality, if there's no depth to that market, you're probably not going to see that growth. And that basis step up is not as significant a benefit as long-term tax-free growth compounding over time. So the underlying investment really needs to stand on its own. And that's how we think about opportunity zone fund investments and always have. This doesn't change that equation, but I think it expands the use case potentially for investors that do have theses around agriculture, logistics, energy infrastructure, some of the things that I articulated earlier.
Yeah, a few really good points there, and it's always good to be reminded that this is an investment first, or any tax strategy / investment opportunity should be on the investment merits, right? And that's why having experienced partners like Griffin Capital has really helped our clients. I do think this is an is an exciting kind of part of the bill to see how this will transpire and the kind of the innovation that comes out of this as well. I mean, we've seen some successful projects in opportunity zones with, say, solar farms, and that's a really interesting use. And we look in, or wind farms as we look in Eastern Washington here. Some of the opportunities there, and so it'll be interesting to see. And certainly, there's lots of area to be, that are available for governors to deem to be rural opportunity zones. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Terry, just as an aside, of the 25,000 or so census tracts that are eligible for 2.0 designation, about a third of them are rural. So I think for those that lean in, it's going to be a great tool. And if you're a governor of a state and you're trying to think about driving an infrastructure project to your state, using this tool to attract that capital could be very powerful. I mean, I think there's other use cases that I'm hopeful for. I don't know if they'll come to fruition, and it's not our expertise, but things like rural healthcare could be tremendously valuable to the communities that get those dollars if there's deemed to be a viable path there from an investment perspective.
Yeah. So more to come on that to see how this plays out. I wanted to add a little kind of Washington State sidebar here. We've got a number of families here in the Pacific Northwest that are business owners in Washington, and because Washington State requires its own footnote in this conversation, the federal OZ benefits, opportunity zone benefits we've been describing, deferral, basis step up, and most importantly, the elimination of tax on the appreciation after 10 years, those all apply at the federal level. Washington State has its own capital gains excise tax, and Washington, at least currently, does not fully conform to the federal OZ exclusion at disposition. So what that means practically, a Washington-based business owner who invests in an opportunity zone fund and holds for 10 years will still owe state capital gains tax in Washington when they eventually exit, even though there's no federal tax due. Although it remains to be seen on that investment, because there's no, currently on the excise tax, no capital gains tax on real estate. So, but certainly the deferral would not qualify in Washington State on that. So I just wanted to kind of make that clear. Still, the larger portion here is the federal tax, which this does defer and mitigate longer term. I want to make all this tangible, because for a business owner, the question isn't just, does the tax math work? It's, what am I actually investing in, and do I believe in it? Nick, walk us through the Laurel Apartments project in East Austin, because I think it's genuinely compelling example of what this program looks like when it works.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It's certainly one we're proud of. And as you articulated, it's one of a little over 30 that we've done in this program to date. Each of our funds is a diversified fund, and Laurel sits within our first Opportunity Zone fund that we launched in 2019. It's a 300-unit community in East Austin, and we partnered with Greystar on it. So to your earlier comment about alignment, we invest capital. Our partners, who are large institutional developers, invest capital alongside of us. So everyone's got skin in the game. And, it's really beneficial to have a very experienced operator alongside of you. Greystar is the largest property manager in the country. They are one of the largest developers, if not the largest developer in the United States. And so when we went through the dynamics after making this investment of a pandemic and saw pretty meaningful supply chain disruptions, having their scale and expertise and their supply chains to access was really beneficial for us. So we're able to deliver it on time, slightly under budget. We leased it to stabilization, recapitalized it with a special distribution that represented about 50% of the capital invested in that project back to our investors. And East Austin was a market where very fast growing metro within Austin at large, as everybody's aware, but East Austin was not growing as fast at the time. And it was a job quarter that was expanding kind of halfway between the Domain, which is a large development with a lot of major employers in downtown, but supply was really chronically behind demand. So it was designated as an Opportunity Zone census tract. We, along with Greystar, identified it as a market in which we would want to be investing capital anyways. And so, it didn't make a bad deal good. It made a good deal even better. So I'd say the tax structure extends our hold, aligns our timeline with how we think about housing creating value in general. But being aligned alongside of Greystar, looking at a market where you need housing, you have job growth, you have proximity to all of the places where people want to live, and then being able to attract the capital through this program to execute on that opportunity and have a successful outcome for investors was exactly how the program was designed.
Exactly. And important that you mentioned kind of the recapitalization, and I think that's important because a lot of people hear about, there's a 10-year hold and assumes their capital is completely locked up and that nothing comes back until year 10. Walk through how refinancing events and operating distributions work inside of the OZ structure and what realistic liquidity looks like during the hold period.
Sure. Yeah. So to your point, it's a 10 plus year duration build to core strategy. So for the first several years, you are developing an asset and then you're leasing it to stabilization. In the development period, you're usually financing the development of that asset with a construction loan. So if the cost to develop an asset is $100 million and you're financing it at a 50%, you have a 50% construction loan. You get out to year 3 where, for the first 12, 14, 16 months, you were developing the asset, then you're leasing it up. You get to around year 3 and a half, that construction loan is now maturing or has a little bit of time left, but the asset is now stabilized and you've realized a development premium, which is why you made the investment. So that $100 million asset, now that it's built, it's got operating cash flow, it's home to hundreds of residents, might be worth $130 million. So you resize your capital structure at that time. And if you take a 50% loan to value loan on that higher value, you have a $65 million loan taking out a $50 million loan. So you've got $15 million of proceeds there on an initial $50 million equity investment. And so what we have the ability to do, assuming that we have adequate reserves to run the portfolio in a normal environment, and we have achieved that development premium and that capital structure is ready to be resized, as I explained, we make a distribution back to investors, and that distribution comes back as return of capital. It's tax-free. And so that is a significant portion of the original investment back in the early years of the investment time horizon. You also now have an asset that's generating operating cash flow. It's stabilized. And so you're realizing as an investor a core real estate return, and that income is being distributed to investors. That income is able to be sheltered by depreciation pass-through. And as a function of that, that income is not taxable at that time. In a normal real estate investment, when you exit, you have to recapture your depreciated basis, and recapturing that depreciated basis is contingent on having a gain at the end of the investment period. Here, because you get a fair market value basis step up as long as you've held your interest in an opportunity zone fund for 10 years, there is no recapture of that depreciated basis. So that income should be fully tax-free. So as you think about the three phases of an opportunity zone fund investment, you've got investment, selection, development, and lease up. That's about the first 4 years. Then you're recapitalizing those assets as they become stabilized operating assets. Through recapitalizing those assets, there should be liquidity there to push back to investors, maybe 15, 20, 30% of their original investment tax-free at that time. And now you have an operating portfolio generating a core real estate return. And core real estate return income characteristics are typically somewhere between 4, 4.5, 5, up to 6%. On an annualized basis, and that cash flow is fully tax-free as well. And then you're selling the portfolio or selling assets after 10 years, and those distributions are fully tax-free. So it is really a phenomenal, unparalleled set of benefits that investors receive, and that liquidity along the way comes from operating the portfolio, being able to make those distributions back to investors.
Yeah, unparalleled. I totally agree, and a lot of folks are familiar with a Roth IRA. It's even better, but with the ability to put millions of dollars, and have it be tax deferred, or at least a portion of it, or have it be tax deferred for a portion of the time. And so here's what I want to land for our listeners, because I hear this a lot, even with CPAs, like especially lately with 1.0, because we're running out of deferral time. So, hey, there's really no deferral, so why would we do this? The deferral on the original gain, that's helpful, but it's not the headline. The headline is what happens to the growth inside the fund. And by the way, this is an asset class that's important in anybody's well-structured portfolio. If you've invested into a well-underwritten real estate portfolio that doubles in value over a decade, at least, if not better, you owe zero federal capital gains tax on any of that appreciation, none. So for a $5 million investment that grows to $10 million, that's $1 million or more in federal tax savings on the growth alone, on top of whatever you deferred on the original gain. So that kind of math, to the point you just made, is hard to replicate through almost any other planning tool that I know of. And anything you can add to that to reinforce that, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, the ability and flexibility here to combine tax structure and planning are phenomenal. So to your point, if you think about sizing, and I think this comes down to the question prior, which is 10 years is a long time. Let's talk about liquidity in the interim period. Yes, there's liquidity in the interim period from recapitalizations and operating cash flows, but liquidity is also a question about sizing. So to your point, if you want to own real estate as part of your portfolio, to take that in a structure where you get tax-free long-term growth with the ability to reposition it in the future, you can't do that in any other structure. And so Then you combine that with the fact that you don't have to recapture any of your depreciated basis along the way. So your income isn't just tax advantaged or tax deferred, it's actually tax free. And you get deferral over a set planning horizon that allows you to implement other strategies to potentially minimize or eliminate that gain. It's really just a phenomenal construct for investors to combine minimization, planning, and investment outcomes.
And the key on all of that is that the investment thesis is there and that you're with strong partners to implement that. And it's the only thing I can point to, because I don't know why more CPAs don't lead with this for clients selling a business with large embedded unrealized gains that they're looking to realize. Like, this is one of the most phenomenal strategies out there, and it should be part of any mitigation strategy. But I think there's this perception, and it's real, that there's single property opportunities that really increase the risk in this. And it's why we work with partners like Griffin and others who spread that exposure out in multiple geographic areas, even property types and whatnot. It just makes it more of an asset class play with a strong partner. So I thought I'd add that. And at Parsion, we're not deploying opportunity zones as a standalone strategy. They sit alongside charitable structures, installment sales, estate planning vehicles, tax loss harvesting strategies, all coordinated around the timing of a liquidity event. And I know you've seen opportunity zones work many times in combination with other parts of a business owner's post-sale plan. What does that coordinated version look like? I'm talking about installment sales and other pass-through gain eligibility windows that push 26 gains into the 2.0 strategy.
Yeah, and I think to your point, the combination of these strategies they sit alongside are different for every investor, and that's why having a quarterback help you with this is so important. And we do see investors gravitate towards sometimes single asset investments, and the risk is just completely outsized the way they would look at any other part of their portfolio, which to us just doesn't make sense from a risk management perspective. So, again, I think it starts with, do I want to own real estate as part of my portfolio? Now, how do I use the strategy to take that exposure to maximize planning outcomes? So to your point, timelines are important. You have 180 days to make an opportunity zone fund investment after you realize a gain. That can span across calendar years. That 180 days is for individual gains. So if I'm selling stock, I've got a business that's structured as a C Corp, as an example. I have the 180-day window. So thinking about timing in concert with that 180-day clock is important. And again, if you've got individual gains and you've got 180 days, maybe making sure your liquidity event happens in the second half of this year, so your 180-day period takes you past January 1st, so that you can use all of the benefits of the new bill, potentially makes sense. If you have gains that are recognized in pass-throughs, so they come on your K1, you've got a lot more flexibility in terms of timing of making your opportunity zone fund investment. So you have 180 days from when you realize the gain, 180 days from the tax year end of that partnership, or 180 days from that partnership's tax filing date, non-extended. So I think, having that information so you can think about when you're eligible to make an opportunity zone fund investment is really important. Other strategies that we see sit alongside of this, sometimes it's 1031 and opportunity zone fund together. So I'm a business owner, I'm selling a business, that business has real estate associated with it. Potentially I can use the 1031 exchange on the real estate component and use the opportunity zone fund on the business component. If I'm charitably inclined, maybe I want to make that charitable contribution in the same tax period during which I'm going to recognize my deferred gain. Potentially that creates some value in the planning process. If I can structure an installment sale so I can fund my opportunities on fund investments over multiple periods under the 2.0 framework, starting January 1st of 27. That means I'm going to recognize the end of that deferral period over different time horizons. So, and tax periods. So I can plan around that. So that is also really valuable. And if I can invest alongside of something tax aware and generate loss carry forward, that creates a lot of value for me if I have 5 years of set deferral time horizon to accumulate losses. So there's all sorts of strategies that can be utilized here, whether it's timing, whether it's philanthropic structures, whether it's other strategies that you invest with other parts of your portfolio. And I think one of the things that we didn't talk about, which I think is interesting, is it's really a great way of separating basis from gain. Because with opportunity zone funds, you're just investing gain or part of a gain, and it doesn't have to be all of the gain. So again, there's liquidity planning that can occur here. So you take a gain, you say, I want some liquidity today. You don't reinvest all of that gain into the opportunity zone fund. You take some of it, you pay some tax, you take the after-tax proceeds for lifestyle reasons or to fund other investments. You take the portion of the gain that you're comfortable with not being liquid and you fund the opportunity zone fund investment. But if I have an asset that has basis and gain together, I can take the basis back. It can be liquid today, and I can take part of the gain or all of the gain and invest it into an opportunity zone fund. So the versatility here, Terry, is phenomenal. And as you're serving clients who have all different types of circumstances, I'm sure you view it as a tool that provides a lot of optionality for investors.
Yeah, 100%. And it sits alongside a number of other strategies to your point when you're considering all the needs and goals and liquidity needs coming out the other side of a sale. And it's the same way when you're constructing an investment policy in a portfolio. A number of our families many times this will be their first meaningful commercial real estate investment. And I think that's worth pausing on a little bit too. There are folks who had nearly their entire net worth concentrated in a single private company, maybe for decades. They understood concentration risk intimately that way, and they lived it. And then they sell, they're suddenly liquid, and they need to build a diversified portfolio, essentially from scratch many times. So opportunity zone advantages, we spent a lot of time talking about the tax side of that, but set those aside for a second. From your seat managing billions in real estate across multiple market cycles, why does real estate belong in a high net worth portfolio? Not the tax argument, the investment argument.
Yeah, and I think, if you look at any institutional portfolio, pension plans, endowments, foundations that don't get the tax benefits we're describing, they are heavily invested in real estate. And the reason why is it's a great portfolio diversifier. So obviously diversification limits risk. It's less correlated to public markets than other asset classes. It historically has been a great hedge against inflation, a predictable generator of income. And I think David Swenson, who ran Yale's endowment successfully for many years, talked about real estate with a baseball analogy and said, it's kind of like starting on second base every year. If you know you're going to get that cash flow, you have embedded return, regardless of whether asset values move up or down, because that income is a nice buffer. And that income historically is very defensive and very predictable, particularly in the housing market. And I think there's a nice duration match. I mean, high net worth investors have long dated liabilities, legacy, philanthropy, generational wealth transfer. Real estate is a long duration asset that generates good risk adjusted returns, particularly over those elongated durations. So having that in the portfolio to diversify, to provide consistent returns, certainly creates a more defensive portfolio over time. And most investors that are high net worth investors are looking at wealth preservation as a primary goal. And real estate historically has been a great preserver of wealth.
Yeah, and anybody that's kind of listened to our portfolio and market updates know our thesis on inflation, and that we believe it's structurally higher than normal for the foreseeable future. And real assets, certainly real estate being one of them, tends to be a great hedge against inflation. So I want to be kind of direct here because I think this conversation would be incomplete without it. The tax efficient and poorly structured is still a bad investment if it's poorly structured. The tail cannot wag the dog. And I'll say it plainly, at Parsion, we have walked clients away from opportunity zone funds that didn't meet our standard. We've reviewed offerings where the real estate thesis was weak, where the sponsor had no track record managing through a downturn, or in these socioeconomic zones and working with the politics and the needs of the community, or where the liquidity mechanics were structured in a way that created real risk for investors. So the opportunity zone wrapper doesn't fix a bad deal. I want to make that clear. And I want to give you the same podium, Nick. I mean, what are the right questions a sophisticated investor or their advisors should be asking when evaluating an opportunity zone fund? Not just the tax math, but the actual investment, market, sponsors, asset quality, deal structure, any of that.
Yeah, I think this is really the most critical component. I mean, to your point, the opportunity zone fund benefits of long-term tax-free growth only matter if you have growth. So you need to have a sound investment thesis and somebody that can execute it. And I can tell you, even for experienced investment managers that have strong expertise, good teams, depth of knowledge, it's still a cyclical business. And I think, while duration helps cyclicality, and real estate is a long duration asset, the real estate risks are the real estate risks here. And so the idea that real estate only goes up over time is not correct. Different sectors will accelerate and decelerate at different times and experience different tailwinds and headwinds in different economic cycles. So I think you need to ask yourself, is this an investment I would be proud to hold over a long period of time, regardless of whether I had the benefits of the tax structure here? I think the idea that there's liquidity when you need it as an investor is not correct in real estate. You need to be willing to hold assets longer because it's not always the right time to land the plane. So, I think if you start with, do I want to own real estate? Would I be proud to own real estate in this structure over a long period of time? Do I think the manager has the expertise? Do I think the manager is aligned? And do I think the manager is going to be there for 10 plus years alongside of me? And that is really critical here. So it's the normal diligence that you would do for any real estate investment. I think there is an added layer of diligence, which is, do they think about compliance in this structure as a transactional cost, or do they have a dedicated infrastructure to it? Who are their partners? What are the accounting firms and law firms that they're working alongside of to ensure that the structure is compliant and the reporting is compliant? So all of those things are added, but it's traditional real estate diligence here.
Yeah, and I would add to that, and you touched on it. The 10 plus year holding period isn't normal for real estate developers. So you need to be sure, to your point on the partnerships and the resources around this, that they're not only set up to develop these properties with good opportunities and in areas that are growing, but be able to run it for a period of time too, or have partners that can. It's an added nuance that experience matters there. So last question, and maybe more of a single answer or two as opposed to a list. But if there's a single idea, a single shift in mindset that you wish business owners or others understood about opportunity zones heading in to 2.0 here into 2027, what is that single mindset or idea that maybe is a takeaway from all this?
Yeah, as much as we've talked about tax, I'd say, stop thinking of the opportunity zone as a tax strategy and start thinking of it as really the most favorable long duration investment structure that Congress has ever put in the tax code. And then I would ask yourself, is the underlying fund and investment opportunity one you want to own for over a decade? And if the answer is yes, then you make the investment. And if the answer is no, no tax benefit's going to save you.
Thank you to Nick Rosenthal and the team at Griffin Capital, who have been valued partners to Parsion and the families we serve. At Parsion Private Wealth, what we're known for more than anything is partnering with business owners and their families to unlock the true potential of their wealth, helping them keep more of what they've built for their family and the causes they care about most. As a result of working with us, our families tell us they feel more clear and confident on what the future looks like for them and their family. Each family is unique and requires a personalized approach to achieve their goals, which starts with seeking the guidance of a trusted expert. If we can help, visit us at parsionpw.com. That's parcionpw.com. And to keep up with new episodes of What's Next, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Terry Cook, and thank you for listening to this episode of What's Next. Until next time.